in association with Victoria Memorial Halls and curated by ThinkArts. This is the first offline session of this year and the first after a hiatus of 1 year. We hope you're as excited as we are. Today's first session is on Andaleeb Wajid's novel, Asmara's Summer, in conversation with Isha Daga. Before we call them on stage, let me introduce you to our guests. Andaleeb Wajid is a hybrid author, having published 33 novels in the past 12 years. Andaleeb enjoys writing in a number of different genres, such as young adult, romance, horror. Her recent novels, All Drama, No Queen, and Mirror Mirror, were published by Penguin Random House and Duckbill, respectively, in 2021. She has an upcoming young adult novel with HarperCollins. Isha Daga is a poetry buff, freelance writer, and storyteller, an enthusiastic elocution coach. For her 9-year-old daughter, she delights in introducing children to the wondrous ways of verse. She has been a journalist and an advertising professional before setting up her own design and digital marketing company called the Karma Creative. Isha is a core group member of ThinkArts and has been organizing workshops and performances for children for several years. So please, let's welcome our guests with a big round of applause.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this offline session with the lovely Andaleeb Wajid. It's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful to have you here with us. And I do hope, some of you are familiar with her work because she is a wonderful writer. And the age that all of you are at, you will just love her novels. I loved her novel, and I'm way beyond. I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I'm way beyond you guys. And I just absolutely love the novel, and I wish I had books like that to read at your age. So Andaleeb actually lives in Bangalore, and she's come all the way to Calcutta to be with us, along with her son, who I'm going to embarrass by saying hi to. Welcome to the city, and thank you all for coming here on this March day to be with us at the Junior Kolkata Lit Meet. So Andaleeb has actually written many, many novels. She has 14 published novels. 25. Oh gosh, I don't know when that happened. I have slightly old information. And you've also been shortlisted for the Young World Good Book Awards. So today's session is on Asmara's Summer, which is a really beautifully written book centered around a teenage girl's visit to her grandparents' house. And I'm going to hand over to Andaleeb to tell you a little bit about the plot and also read a little bit and share with us excerpts from her book.
Thank you so much for this lovely introduction, Isha. Thank you for inviting me. Junior Kolkata Literary Meet. I'm really honored and really happy to be here. And wonderful to see all of you here today in school uniforms. And I think we kind of agree that we wish we had these sort of things when we were growing up, accessible authors and the chance to talk to them and listen to them in person. So today I'm here to talk about my novel Asmara's Summer, which was published a while ago. But I think it's a sort of book that stays relevant even despite the years. So as Isha said, it's a story of this girl who has to visit her grandparents' house. So normally we all love visiting our grandparents' house, right? There's no, no one stopping us from eating chocolates, and, grandparents giving us a lot of, love and affection and yeah, yes, and hardly any, no one scolding you, no one giving you, putting limits on these, how much TV you can watch and all that. But Asmara was planning to go to Canada, where her brother and his family, his brother and his wife, they are having a baby. So her parents and Asmara had been planning to go to Canada when she realizes that for some reason she can't go to Canada. She has to stay back in India while her parents go. So I think if something like that would happen, that would itself would be such a huge disappointment, because you're planning, and Asmara is a sort of girl who's very popular in college, and she's already told everyone, all her friends, that she's going to Canada, and you can check my Instagram, I'm going to be posting lots of fun pics and everything. And then she realizes that she's not going to Canada. And to make it worse, her parents want her to stay with her mother's parents, her grandparents. And that's not really the bad thing, but for Asmara, it's like her world has come to an end, because her grandmother lives in this locality which Asmara hates. It's a slightly down market locality. She thinks it's down market. She doesn't know it beyond what she's kind of seen about it. She thinks it's down market, and she kind of, I think the worst thing for her is when she realizes that her nanny's house doesn't have Wi-Fi. So imagine if she has to spend the summer there without Wi-Fi, and in this place where, she's very conscious of it, where her friends, if they were to know that she's living here, because they all make fun, when they're together, they make fun of people who live there, and now she's living there herself, and she can't let anyone know, and she can't update her Instagram, obviously, which kind of plays a huge role in the book, where, she has to stay with her grandmother. So it's kind of the summer from hell for her. But that's not what happens in the book, obviously, So this is a summer that transforms her, it changes her. It makes her look at things differently, and she makes new friends, and there's also a very hunky next door neighbor who kind of sets her heart aflutter. So that's a story, and there's a lot happening. I mean, now when I look at it, I'm like, how did I pack all this into this? It's always happening.
You really did. I was at the edge of my bed,
I always have this out-of-body experience whenever I'm reading one of my own books later. So when I read one of my books, I'm like, but what was I thinking? How did this happen? I've got this whole thing where someone's coming to see a girl for her wedding, and then someone, it's a crazy ride, if I say so myself. So I really think you should read it, and you'll really enjoy it. I'll read out a small part where I think she gets to know that she's not going. The only reason I'm not screaming is because my mouth is full of chocolate. My mother has to be the most devious woman on the planet. She opened a huge bar of dairy milk silk and handed it to me. And like a fool, I took it without the slightest suspicion. I mean, this is my mother here, the woman who doesn't let us eat at KFC, who doesn't approve of random chocolate eating either. She waited until I popped a couple of squares into my mouth, and when my eyes were shut in bliss, she dropped this bomb on me. So I just need to tell you, we won't be able to take you to Canada this time, she said, without pausing for breath. I opened my eyes, horrified, in a silent scream. What? I managed to unglue my tongue from my palate, and yet the chocolate flooding my mouth doesn't let me show my real outrage. So her mother explains, gives a reason, long-drawn reason why she can't go. And then Asmara is like, what should I do then? I ask her angrily, unable to believe that this is actually happening. All these days, the only thing that had kept me going was the thought of my vacation. And now, just like that, it had been snatched away from me. About that, she says, looking more uneasy. And she actually hands me more chocolate. Have some more, you'll need it. What? Why? I cross my arms and look at her mutinously. we thought it would be a good idea for you to stay at your grandparents' place this summer, she says slowly. There's a roaring in my ears that won't subside. My skin has turned clammy and cold. I'm not sure I understand her correctly. She doesn't mean it, right? She couldn't possibly. It's a couple of weeks late for an April Fool's joke. She can't really expect me to stay with my grandparents this summer on Tannery Road.
Thank you so much. Did you enjoy that? I could see a lot of heads shaking and relating to that reaction, you know. So actually, Asmara's summer is really a story about, you know, people like you who are young adults, you know, going into college, and it's pretty much the same, I think, today. What do you think, Andaleeb? It's, you know, there's a very little gap. There's very little gap between what we call young adults and actual adults, right? So, yeah, go ahead.
So I think, you know, children everywhere tend to grow up faster than, you know, adults want to believe or acknowledge. In our minds, we would like them to stay children. We want them to be small kids, you know. But they've grown up. They've, you know, they're seeing the world around them and what's happening. And in them, you know, they are leagues beyond that. So young adults, I wouldn't say, you know, young adults in the strictest term is that they're young, but they're also adults. But when we're speaking of the genre of young adults, I've always maintained that, you know, young adult fiction is for anyone who is young at heart. And, you know, it's not restricted to people who are young.
Absolutely. So, you know, I wanted to ask you that about Asmara. And Asmara is pretty much a feisty young college girl, you know, who blurs, and I said teenage earlier, but actually she could be a teenager too, right? Because today's older teenagers are pretty much like college kids, you know, at least from our times. And Asmara blurs all lines of community. What do you feel about the role of traditions in an increasingly modern and homogenized world, where young people are connected in subcultures, you know, that are related more through hashtags than geographies?
So I think, you know, for, I mean, this is the culture now. This is what they relate to. And in the case of Asmara, I think it was a sort of reconnecting with her roots, you know, and a very reluctant reconnecting, you know, because she was very happy in her own bubble, in her own life. I think that's what happens in today's world, increasingly online world, is that everyone is living in their own bubble, you know, and it's very hard to step out of that, and kids are getting more and more reluctant to step out of it. So I think Asmara's, you know, dismay at having to live in her grandparents' house is also, it also stems from that, you know, she has to step out of her comfort zone, she has to step out of her own bubble, and she has to actually acknowledge the different lives around her. Is one of the things I think that makes it so difficult for her to accept that reality. Because I think it's not just kids. A lot of us want to stay within our comfort zones. We don't want to acknowledge the pain in the world. We don't want to acknowledge the difficulties because, you know, it becomes too much to deal with at times. So for Asmara, I think it was a very natural reaction. And you were talking about hashtags. I didn't get that bit.
No, I was saying that, do you feel that, you know, the young people today are more connected through this subcultures of hashtags than really where they grow up, you know?
You know,
do you feel that Asmara could be a girl from anywhere, yes, you know, yes, who would, you know, anybody anywhere could relate to Asmara's character?
So that
really,
was
right?
the idea.
Situation,
you know,
and predicament.
When I wrote it, I wanted it to be a girl who could be relatable anywhere. You know, it's just incidental that she's Muslim. That gives a different, also, it has a different, you know, a whole different connotation to it, which I didn't deliberately go into, but it really does affect, you know, how she views. She comes from a very modern family, and her grandmother is the opposite of that. Her grandmother, like, you know, is shocked when she sees her wearing shorts at night. And, you know, she uses, I think there's one scene where her grandmother pretends to kill a mosquito but slaps her thigh just as an excuse, you know, ye kya pehna hai, sort of thing. So, you know, that kind of straddling between two worlds is not easy for anyone. For teenagers, it's all the more difficult. And I think I think teenagers will, whatever they're comfortable with, they're going to go with that.
Taking off from that, actually, about Asmara's relationship with her grandmother and this not very, welcomed visit to Tannery Road. And Asmara actually didn't visit her grandparents for years on end. Her grandmother would come and visit them, but she would not visit Asmara would not visit her grandparents simply because they lived on Tannery Road, which was a very conservative community and conservative, area of Bangalore, which is otherwise such a modern city. And Asmara's own little world was, like Andaleeb said, in a bubble where she had the best of everything. She'd sleep in an AC room, and the driver would come and pick her up every morning. It was a very plush, luxurious, comfortable life with 24/7 Wi-Fi, And then she goes to her grandparents' house. So do you feel that this, what do you feel about, where we are going with this intergenerational relationships, with all of these in such a device-driven society bubble, if one may say?
I don't know, I don't want to sound pessimistic and say that things are just, it is the way of the world to evolve in, whether it's like 20 years ago, we didn't have cell phones, at least not to this extent. And we didn't have this dependence on them. And, we kind of turned to our elders if we needed advice, and now we just Google for it, So it's, so,
Google is God.
Yeah, so it's just something that you have to accept and move on. I think like 50 years ago, when there was no TV as such, and people were like, TV is changing everything. We kind of, my son had this poem about, I think Roald Dahl's poem about what television does. So I was like...
Mike TV, I think.
Something, yeah. So, I mean, when I was reading that, I was thinking, so he's going on about how TV ruins children's imaginations and brains. And I'm like, but what about now? Can you imagine? With, I think there's such a huge, it's such a huge consumption culture where people just want to consume content and, not really think about creating any, or it's the other extreme where, everyone wants to be a writer, they don't want to read books. So we're kind of trying to figure out, I really don't blame teenagers for whatever they're trying to adjust in the world that they've been handed to us, to them by us. Sure. So they have to make the best of it.
Right. So how do you decide which stories to share with the world? For instance, how did the inspiration for Asmara's Summer come to you?
So stories for me, ideas, I find them everywhere, I find them, it's the key to, writing a story is to being aware of finding something interesting, looking at something and seeing a story in it. Like Asmara's Summer, I was passing by Tannery Road. So Tannery Road is a real locality in Bangalore. I was passing by Tannery Road in an auto, and I was just wondering what it would be like if I had to live there. And a very snobbish part of me was like, oh God, I will die if I have to live here. It's not that bad, It's just my sensibilities were like, no, I can't live here. And, from there, my mind started thinking, what if I set a story here? What if a girl had to live here? And, then I kind of reduced her sentence to a month. And thought, okay, let a girl spend her summer here and see whether it transforms her. And the transformation happened very organically. I didn't set about to, changing her perceptions, like, oh, so she's come back to her roots, so she will change. It wasn't something that I deliberately set out to do. It happened very organically, It also happened, her realization of how different people, and, being cool was not everything. That realization also was something, because in the end, she is the absolute opposite of that, and especially when her photo goes up on Instagram, I won't give the details. She is the absolute opposite of being cool, and she's okay with it, So that was, for me, I think, a very, I think that transformation was important.
So it's also about the sensitivity, isn't it? Where spending time with her grandparents and making a friend next door in Rukhsana, who was so different, vastly different from her, where, there was no question of shorts and there was definitely no question of, and she would wear, she was amazing with her Zardozi embroidery and very worlds removed from Asmara's own upbringing. But how they become friends and how just differences are not really unsurmountable, and also the sensitivity that, where when Asmara came in, she didn't even want to see her grandparents, right? And then gradually she kept thinking her grandmother was so inconsiderate for not making her room more comfortable, etc. But then later on she realized that she reached a point where she was also helping her grandmother clean up the house and get things ready, and also sensitive to her feelings when she put on, the shiny salwar kameez to go out, though it was against her. So this transformation is very subtle in your book. And how do you come about this development of character? How do you work on your character development?
So normally I do make a lot of notes when I'm writing my books. So this is a slightly older book for me because I've written so many since then. So I didn't deliberately make any notes, and Asmara's character evolved on the page as I was writing it. I didn't deliberately set out to make her the way she is. Her reactions might... so Asmara, as you mentioned earlier, is this really free-spirited, sort of spunky girl. And to be honest, I really like to think of her as my alter ego when I was a child, when I was a teenager, the girl I couldn't be. The girl I couldn't be because of my own restrictions, because of my own family, the girl I would have loved to be. So, so I always think of her as that.
Is there any autobiographical reference to any of the characters?
Nowhere.
No
Sadly,
Farzan?
Nowhere, no Farzan.
Was there a Farzan in your life?
I wish. So, this book does not have any autobiographical elements. I think maybe Asmara's bond with her grandmother is, very similar to the bond I had with my grandmother, which is, in the sense, the love, the love, and where she feels that if she puts her head on her grandmother's lap, everything is going to be fine. That was the feeling my own grandmother would evoke in me, So,
did she slap you on the thigh when you were wearing shorts?
No. I never wore shorts, sadly.
So, you've shared in the past how some people can have difficulty believing or accepting that a burqa-clad woman can be a writer and, such an accomplished woman in her own right. I remember you mentioning that on Twitter, and you retweeted that recently, saying that it's amazing, that it's still relevant.
I think that was in reference to what's happening right now.
Right.
So that was in reference to that. I've always had a lot of people, the thing is, wearing a burqa, is for various reasons. For me, it's always been about my comfort level. It's not so much as who or what I represent, but for me, it's a part of myself. So I've never really shied from wearing it to literary events and festivals, where I will inevitably be the only burqa-clad person there. I think what I was trying to say was that people who meet me initially, they have this sort of, they're surprised initially when they see that this person is here at a literary event. So they assume that I write in Urdu. And then after that, when we talk and I tell them, no, I write in English. I mean, I would love to write in Urdu, but I don't know Urdu that well. I think it's not so much about breaking stereotypes, but also just, I just feel like this is me being here doing my job. What I wear or don't is really not, should not be, it should not be important. And,
right.
I think for me what's important is I'm just doing my job. and I'm doing it with whatever I'm comfortable in. So I don't see why it should make anyone else uncomfortable.
What you love to do, the way you love to do it, and that is who you are. So, you also have other characters in your book, perhaps Noor and Dennis's story, you could refer to, in Blinkers Off, who break stereotypes, So even if you're not consciously doing it, you have mentioned in the past that, you do like to break stereotypes about Muslim women. So what are the other stereotypes that you have tried to break? And I have a sub-question in that, which is, what are your views? I'd love to share it. I'd love for you to share your views, because we have so many young people in the audience, all of whom are, subject, I'm sure, mostly to social media and Instagram and a kind of a distorted and unrealistic view of beauty, So what would you say about these perceptions, and how can young people deal with them,
So the first question that you asked about stereotypes, what's interesting for me is that I really didn't set about doing it, deliberately. When I wrote my first novel, Kite Strings, what really, that was a younger, I would say, coming of age novel about a girl trying to find direction in her own life. And she was a Muslim, and she was a South Indian Muslim like me. And what really struck me was when people reached out to me, readers, saying that this could be our story, or this could be our story, which was when I realized that stories, people are universal, and I think the settings, the way they were, where they grew up, it kind of gives context to the story. But at the end of it, everyone wants the same thing. So even if Kite Strings was about this girl trying to find what she wants to do in her life, this was something that people from whichever walks of life could relate to, women, young women and older women who wrote to me saying, we felt like this when we were growing up. So from, setting that story in the Muslim household was incidental. But at the same time, I realized that I have been subconsciously normalizing Muslim culture, Muslim life, where I don't know why people would assume that it's, something, exotic in a bad way. So, I just wanted to say that, that this is not, this is exactly how we are just like you. And I didn't go about doing it deliberately. About the other question that you had, I wish I knew, Isha. I don't know myself. I mean, it's so easy to get caught up in the whole scrolling thing where you see influencers put up, perfectly composed photos and perfectly, and then to realize that there is a whole setup that goes behind it. Even as an adult, I get taken in by it, So I don't blame the kids if they are finding. I think it. It's this. Staying away from the phone is hard enough for me. So I don't know. I don't know how I can advise young children, to stay away from your phones. But I think it is good once in a while to look up to see how things are, and
As a writer, one obviously wants their writing to be enjoyed. So what are some of the most interesting reactions? You mentioned one right now, from kids who came up to you and said that this could be us. So what are some of the interesting reactions you've had to your various kinds of writing?
The usual ones are, is this autobiographical? Is this based on your life? But the unusual one was also the same question, but asked for a book which was somewhat science fiction. I wrote about a girl, I wrote 3 books, a trilogy called the Tamannaah Trilogy, where this girl goes back in time, So someone asked me, is it autobiographical? So I was like, how? I wish.
Didn't go back in time? You really didn't go back in time?
So that was one interesting reaction that I've always laughed over,
That's funny. You've also said that you love writing about food and weddings. So, can you share some interesting food and wedding episodes in your life?
To be very honest, I've always felt that our weddings and everything are the most boring weddings in the world, There's literally no Naach Gana, nothing, whatever you see in the other weddings. We see people having Sangeet and all that, and we are like, kuch nahi hota, the girl will sit on the stage, they'll come and they'll, pile her with flowers, and the only thing to look forward to is the food. So, food is like the only vice we have. So I kind of try to, maximize in that. Weddings, I think not so much the wedding, but the shenanigans that happen around the wedding, So that is what really I enjoy when I'm going to a wedding. What I like to see is, the various dynamics among the different people, the bride's mother, the bridegroom's mother, and, the people around the stage. The bride and groom are inconsequential,
Share some funny things that you've noticed. Because if one goes through your books, one can really make out what a keen observer you are of human life and of the nuances, because your writing is so nuanced. Every expression is noted, how she reacts, how the boys react, how Ruxana as a third party watching the exchange between her brother and, Asmara. So you are a very sensitive writer. Share some of these experiences.
So, I wouldn't say I can't really pinpoint any one or two experience as such, because, these things, when they happen, I kind of look at them, observe them, and store it for later. So, like, there are weddings where, I kind of would have sat back in the audience, or, and I would observe and I would see, and I also observe the boys and girls, trying to look very innocent as they talk to each other. And I'm like, haan, pata hai, some dal mein kala hai, So I'm proper auntie in my head. And so I, will observe them very carefully and, try to make. So, I mean, the actual weddings, I would say, are hardly as interesting as the weddings that happen in my books. So I recently wrote a book called Accidentally Married, which is on Amazon. It's an e-book. So it's a story set in this fictional building in Bangalore, where, an apartment building where everyone is kind of knows each other. They all, like, meddle in each other's lives, and two people from the building are getting married. The only thing is that they hate each other. So they were childhood rivals, enemies, whatever, and they are getting married.
Gosh.
So that's why it's called Accidentally Married. So I had a ball writing it, I mean, I find the actual weddings themselves are really very, dull affairs, So I try to spice them up with my books.
Sure. And you started writing at the age of 10. That's pretty early, right?
It was, I've always enjoyed telling stories.
Yeah.
So I would, get together, like every time there was a gap between the teacher coming between classes, and this was in 6th standard, I think, and, we would, like, our class was very isolated from the rest of the classrooms for some reason, and the teachers would take a little time to cross over the field and come. And I would get in front of the class and I would randomly tell them a story. Some ghost story, movie I'd watched, I would relate the story to them. And everyone initially would be like, what is she doing? But they would be like into it by the time the teacher came. So I realized that I really loved telling stories. And it kind of took a form where I wanted to write them also. And I've been, writing mostly. Initially, my earlier stories were blatant copies of Enid Blyton and, similar things. And then it kind of started evolving and I started writing. And it took a long time for me to figure out what I'm good at when it comes to writing.
But what did your school, schoolmates were clearly very enamored with your stories. And I'm sure it's no surprise to them that you've become a writer. But what about your family? What was their reaction to you pursuing writing as a full-time career?
So the first novel, when my first novel came out, everyone, for them, half of my family reads and half my family doesn't read. So the non-reading family can't understand the concept of imaginary stories. They assumed that the whole thing was real. And they were like, she has written about us. She has written about the time you did this and she written about that. So they were having that kind of conversation. And I want to tell them that this is entirely fictional. although the first novel was quite autobiographical in, small incidents and some characters where people read it and they were immediately able to recognize this is this aunt. But I've learned to mask it now. My family is, I think, initially they were looking at it, my extended family. My own family were very proud and they are very proud and they're very happy. So they just want me to be happy, and writing makes me happy. So I would say I'm very privileged. My extended family would always look at it as some sort of quirky hobby she has, They can't understand what she's doing and why she's doing this.
So who are some of the authors and books that you grew up, as a young adult loving?
I would read whatever came my way, I'm absolutely in awe of technology because it gives me the Kindle and the access to books whenever I want them. When I was young, getting books was so difficult. You had to go to a library somewhere and, borrow some books by some nondescript writer. And, if I was lucky, some hardbound book would turn out to be a romance, which I wouldn't even know what it is, but I would end up reading and come across a lot of nice, interesting, spicy scenes. And, I would be like, oh, wow, jackpot. But I think, growing up, I read whatever I could get, I read a lot of Reader's Digest because we didn't get that many books. I read the usual, Sidney Sheldon, and we read a lot of R.K. Narayan. And I think as I grew older, I read more diverse authors and, developed a taste as such. So it took a while to figure out, but I enjoy reading both Indian authors and, authors. I mean, Indian authors now are really all over the place, but I've been reading Indian authors since the early 2000s. So
it's wonderful to see so much Indian writing in English and in other languages, and, them being available everywhere on Kindle as well. It really does help, doesn't it? So I was wondering if you would like to read a few more excerpts from your book for our audience, because I could. Yes, we have some time. How are we on time, Pabali? 10 minutes? We have. So we can definitely read 3 passages. Would you like that, audience? Because I saw a lot of very big smiles at the first excerpt. So I think they'd enjoy some more excerpts.
Okay. So I'm reading a little further on where Asmara is trying to settle into, her life in Tannery Road. So my days merge into each other seamlessly. There's boredom, thankfully some yummy food courtesy of Nani, and of course Instagram that fills my days. So she starts an anonymous Instagram account, mostly to take down Tannery Road, to make fun of it, and which she calls Jalebi Bai. But that kind of becomes something else, Now Nani doesn't say anything when I step out in the evenings to take pictures for Jalebi Bai's Instagram Instagram account. Sorry, I have pretty much put Tannery Road on the Instagram map now. Although I've been giving Shaista Fancy Center a wide berth because our hero kind of works there in the evenings. Farzan's intense glare often tracks me when I'm in the vicinity, but I try to ignore him, and the sudden way my heart skips a beat when I see him. A week later, around 4 in the evening, I'm inside my room, drowsing on the mat, dreaming of college, my friends, and when I will escape from here, when the sound of rain startles me awake. There's a roll of thunder and then a loud clatter. I step outside cautiously, and I'm immediately assailed by what seems like millions of icy hard pellets hitting the ground. It's a hailstorm. I run back inside, get my phone, take a video, and post it immediately, excited at having seen hailstones for the first time in my life. So the first time she sees, she also wants to document it. I didn't realize it when I was writing it, but it seemed very natural. So the hailstorm here on the terrace seems so harsh and so real. And then I've never been a big fan of rain or thunder, and I've always avoided getting caught in the rain as much as possible. My mother, on the other hand, is a bit batty when it comes to rain. So it's raining, and she's, out in the terrace, dancing over there. And Asmara, come down, you'll fall sick. Nani shouts over the downpour. I pretend not to hear her and twirl around, thinking that my mom knew what she was doing. A quick glance at the other terraces shows me that most women haven't taken off the clothes from their clotheslines, and now the clothes are all wet. On Ruxana's terrace, there was something that had been kept out to dry in the sun. Whatever it was now most likely ruined. Asmara, Nani, grabs my hand and pulls me. She's getting drenched too, and I can see that she doesn't like it. Coming, this is as close to a shower as I'll get, I shout cheerfully, pulling her hand away and looking up at the sky. So she's going, finally giving it up as a lost cause. Sorry, one sec. I go back inside my room and stop short. The rain has stormed into my room as well, and my laptop is lying in a puddle of water. No, I shout and run to rescue my beloved things. My phone has somehow managed to stay dry, but my laptop is it's not switching on. A range of expletives comes to mind, and I control myself with great difficulty. Nani is lingering near me, a towel in her hand, and I feel like snapping at her. If only she'd kept some furniture for me there, all my things would have been safe. Why are you so worried? It will work, she says. I look up at her, and I think she can understand my expression because she steps back a little warily. Farzan is an expert at fixing everything. He'll do it, she suggests. My head snaps up again. Farzan, he wouldn't lift a finger to help me even if I were drowning. The feeling is mutual, I tell myself repeatedly, but the tiniest bit of hope flickers in my heart. Will you ask him, please? I ask Nani, trying not to sound desperate. Yes, I will. Now come fast and change your clothes or you'll fall sick. I finally leave my things on the dining table and follow Nani to her room, where she makes me change into one of her salwar kurtas. 3 of me can fit into it. And it's not because Nani is that much fatter than me. It's just that loose. The sleeves flap around my wrist and the kurta hangs on my body like a tent. I glance at myself in the mirror as I towel my hair dry. If Naina or Tanya saw me like this, they'd die of laughter.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I was just wondering if there are any questions in the audience. If anybody would like to ask Andaleeb anything at all about, sure, please. Can we have a mic, please?
Good morning, ma'am. Ma'am, being an author yourself, do you idolize any other authors or you've taken inspiration from any other authors?
I read a lot. So there's not one author as such. I really admire many authors. So it's very tough to pinpoint any particular author.
Good morning, ma'am. Hello.
Louder.
Good morning, ma'am.
Yeah,
ma'am, actually, I had a question from more than just biryani. Like, you have portrayed 3 different generations, like the grandmother, the mother, and the daughter. So I just want to ask, like, which generation do you feel to be the most luckiest or the happiest one?
That's a lovely question. First of all, thank you so much. I didn't expect to come across someone who's read more than just biryani here. I think the grandmother's generation was the luckiest, things were much simpler for in their lives. They sadly didn't have the technology access that we have, but things were real. I feel they were real. And, that story, the grandmother's story was the sweetest for me. The main heroine's story was filled with a lot of angst. And her mother was a little weird, but grandmother's was the nicest for me.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? So how many of you read romance fiction? Be honest, it's okay, your teachers will close their eyes. Okay, that's quite a few people. So would you like to tell us a little bit? I know this is about Asmara summer, but since we have enough readers, would you like to tell us a little bit about the romance in your novels?
I kind of, when I started writing, I didn't realize that I ended up including a lot of romance in my novels without realizing it. So, especially in my first novel, it was quite dark, it was quite angsty, but a sort of romantic element had crept in, and I realized that, we kind of don't give young adults enough credit in that they would enjoy something, a simple romance also. This was, of course, 12 years ago. Now, of course, things are very different. But I think the idea of, romance, the concept of romance is very old-fashioned. It's very, there's something very, it feels immutable, and which is something which appeals to a lot of people. And there's sadly a lot of people who kind of, denigrate romance, who kind of say that it's the worst genre, which I have no problems if they feel that way. But I think a lot of people do enjoy it because of the hope that it offers. That, that in the end, everything will be all right.
Everybody likes love in their life,
Yes.
right?
So,
whatever form that may be in.
Yeah. A lot of people kind of, shy away from reading romance or talking about it. And if they do, they say that, romance is our guilty pleasure, like they're defending themselves. So I would just like to tell people that, don't ascribe guilt to pleasure. And if you're reading something for pleasure, then enjoy it. And it's as simple as that. If you don't have to defend your choices to anyone. And it's not like you're learning bad things from it. So at least...
Well, I think I totally endorse that, art for art's sake, and everything has its place in the world. And you also write, you have also written horror.
I love writing horror.
Did you know that? You didn't know that, did you?
My upcoming novel with HarperCollins is a horror novel, and it's for young adults. So I just love writing horror because I'm a huge scaredy cat. I get scared very easily. So if I watch a horror movie, I mean, my kids will watch, they will watch. But if I have to watch something, I have to either read the synopsis first, or I will watch it during the day in very controlled circumstances where I can, quickly pause.
Keep the curtains open.
Keep the curtains absolutely open. But when I'm writing, I feel like I'm in the driver's seat. So I can control the scares. I decide who gets, killed or who gets chopped off or whatever. And I'm so surprised, when we were kids, we were scared of horror novels, and the kids today just love it. They love horror, So I also love horror. People always used to ask me, how come this transition from writing romance to horror? And very snarkily, I would tell them, because, romance eventually turns into horror. So if you stay with the fun person long enough, that's what happens.
I'm not sure that's a very optimistic way of projecting romance to our young people here. But we will let you figure that out during the course of your lives. And I think we'll just like to close the session with a few words for our young potential, maybe readers, writers, like Andaleeb said. Don't shun anything, and don't look down upon any form of writing. Read it, let it all touch you in some way or the other. But any advice or any words of wisdom to share with our young readers and writers?
I think, today's a lot of kids are really sorted, compared to my generation. They're very sorted.
Totally.
So some of them are, of course, confused, which is all right, even if they're not sorted. I would just like to tell, kids today that if you want to be a writer especially, get a day job, and don't think writing is a sort of... it's not the romanticized kind of, job or lifestyle there is. Writing is something that I take very seriously, and I treat it like a day job, which is the only way I've been able to write so much. And generally, I think, the world outside might be terrible, but I think, when you lose yourself in a book for a few minutes, for an hour or so, the world doesn't seem that bad. So keep reading.
So that's it for today's session with Andaleeb Wajid and Asmara's Summer. We do hope you will pick up some of our books and read them. And she's on social media, so I'm sure many of you are anyway. So do follow her, and do give her feedback on her writing, because that's what every author loves. And thank you so much. You've been such a great audience. It's been wonderful having you for this session. Thanks for joining us. And please follow the other sessions that are coming up as well.
Thank you so much, Isha, for this, and thank you for inviting me. And thank you for being, like she said, a wonderful audience. And, without threatening anyone, we got questions. That is
absolutely. Yes,
that is very commendable.
We had a very quality audience.
Yes.
Thank you so much, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Isha.
Bye-bye.
Hello. Yeah, that was a lovely session, and a relatable one too. I can't wait to purchase your books and read them right away. So we have certificates for the participants here. So Tara, could you just... Okay. Sorry, there has been a confusion. So we'll take a short break and another round of applause for Andaleeb and Isha. I hope you liked the session because I definitely loved it.